Well, everyone, let's go ahead and do a comparison between the M1 iPad Air 5, technically speaking, and the M1 iPad Pro and see which specific iPad you should go and pick up. Now, I'll definitely tell you if you have all the money in the world, going up to something like the M1 iPad Pro is probably the best way to go. I mean, these iPads are killer. They have so much capability within them, and they are definitely some of the iPads I would probably recommend most people to buy. But with that being said, they are substantially more expensive than the M1 iPad Air by a little bit, So there's a couple different models of the M1 iPad Pro. You have the 11-inch model and the 12.9-inch model, where the iPad Air only has one model. It's the 11-inch model technically, and definitely when it comes down to the build quality, they're almost the exact same thing. One doesn't really feel exponentially more premium than the other one, but with the more expensive 12.9-inch iPad, I mean, that is a really good looking iPad, and it definitely is much bigger than the standard iPad Air, so that is one thing to keep in mind. But if we're comparing apples to apples, the 11-inch models of both, then they're relatively in the same body. You have beautiful 11-inch displays on them, or that 12.9-inch panel for that $1099 price tag. The standard iPad Air 5 starts at $599, the standard iPad Pro starts at $799, but that 12.9-inch model is $1099. And what I can tell you about the price tags right there is that I think it is worth a jump going from that $599 one to a $799 one, depending on which way you look at it. Personally, I do think something like that 11-inch iPad is more than enough for me. And since they both have the same M1 chipset inside, there are really only differences in a few different areas. So if you need something with a little bit more performance, well, maybe the iPad Pro is the one for you. I mean, it's definitely the one I think would be more well-rounded, but you are paying for that extra, display quality, for that extra camera quality as well. With the iPad Air, you're kind of getting an overall really good package for that price tag. You're going to pick up that iPad and you're going to feel like you're getting a really good value per dollar. With the M1 iPad Pro, you're spending a little bit more money, but you also, I don't really get the vibe that it's a bad priced iPad either, which is very interesting. Sometimes you would see two devices and you'd be like, oh, this one is an exponentially better deal. But because there's only about a $200 difference between these two, one doesn't really feel way more premium or way better than the other one. But I will tell you that 12.9-inch iPad, I don't necessarily think it's the best value per dollar. I think that one is a little bit overpriced, to be honest, considering how similar it is in a lot of different ways to the iPad Pro 4th generation and even the iPad Pro 3rd generation as well. Now, in terms of the build quality, like I said, almost the exact same thing down the road. There really isn't one that's going to be way better than the other one here, so that is one thing to keep in mind. But the camera quality is probably one of the bigger differences when it comes down to these two iPads. So with something like the iPad Air 5, you do have that single camera setup on the back, but you do now get a little bit of a better front-facing camera, which is actually really cool. With the iPad Pro, the M1 model, you kind of have the same setup, at least on the front. You have that ultra-wide sensor with that center stage, which is really cool. Both of them have that capability. But the back is where things get a little bit more interesting. The M1 iPad Pros, they have a dual camera setup with an additional LiDAR sensor. Now, why is this important? Well, pretty much on the standard M1 iPad Pros, we have a 12 megapixel wide camera, then we have a 10 megapixel ultra-wide sensor. Now, these are some really cool sensors to have in this day and age. Although the capability behind them are almost identical from the iPad Air to the iPad Pro, you are getting an overall better camera setup on the M1 iPad Pro. And Apple knows that this is what people are going to look at when they're looking at both iPads, in the store or whatever. And when you flip them over to the back, that is where you're going to start seeing some big differences. Personally, for me, I would not go from an iPad Air to an iPad Pro just because of the camera. There are so few differences here, I wouldn't even be able to tell you those big of differences between them. But with an iPad Air, the only difference I'd be able to tell, at least if I'm in the store or whatever, is the fact that, that one has a single camera and this one has a multiple camera setup. That's probably a big thing. But there is also a little bit of a difference with the front camera. With the iPad Pro, you do get Face ID enabled on that sensor, which is really cool. So it does have the Face ID technology behind that lens, which I think is really important for a lot of iPads that are coming out. That is the future, and personally, I still prefer Touch ID, like how we have it on the iPad minis and the iPad Air, but some people may not like that. So Face ID is the future, it's here to stay, and that is one advantage that we have on something like the M1 iPad Pro over the iPad Air. But personally, with the camera quality, I really think they're almost the same. I would probably like the iPad Pro camera more because it does have that dual camera setup. But other than that, when it comes down to the outside, there really isn't too much of a difference when it comes down to this specific point. Now, also when it comes down to accessories, they both kind of support the same accessories when it comes down to it. They both support Apple Pencil 2 support, which is really big. And there may be some other accessories here and there that may be a little bit of difference between these two. But overall, because they support the Apple Pencil 2, that's a really big accessory that many people use. Now, another big thing between these iPads is actually the software. Because they both have the M1 chipset inside, one of the biggest things between them is the software longevity. And because Apple makes the M1 chip and they put so much marketing behind these iPads, I truly do think Apple is going to be supporting these iPads for a long period of time. Now, because of that, I think Apple's going to be just continuing to support these things probably for the next several years. I don't know how long, but the good thing to think about between these iPads is however long the iPad Pro lasts is pretty much how long the iPad Air is going to last. So there isn't going to be an iPad that exponentially lasts way longer than the other one. At least I don't think so. There could be some differences, there could be some things in the future, but as of right now, it looks like however long the iPad Pro lasts, that's how long the iPad Air is going to last. And quite potentially however long the MacBook lasts, that's how long this one's going to last too. I don't know 100% for a fact, but that could potentially be what's happening. And I think that would be really awesome. So I'll definitely keep you guys updated in the next couple of years of what happens there, but that kind of covers it up in the software standpoint. Now, interestingly enough, the performance standpoint, this is where it kind of starts blending in. I mean, you're really going to be getting theoretically the same amount of performance on something like an M1 iPad Air than the M1 iPad Pro. Now, RAM models are different per different of these models. So if you're getting the iPad Air, well, there's really only like one model to choose from. The iPad Pros have different RAM variants you can choose. So that's another big, massive thing to keep in mind. And personally, when it comes down to me, I do think that getting the most amount of RAM is really awesome. You know, if you get those higher end iPad Pros, well, you have a lot more flexibility here. So if you want the cheapest one, you can go for the 8 gig of RAM option, and you can get up to 16 gigs of RAM on these things, which is more than enough in my opinion. So if you're somebody who's going to be doing a lot of those different type of tasks and those different types of, activities, well, that is a big thing you're going to have to keep in mind. Personally, I don't really utilize everything in an iPad, so I'm not like editing a bunch of videos or anything like that. So even like 4 gigabytes of RAM is more than enough for me, but that's not the case for everybody. If you're planning on getting an iPad Air or getting an iPad in general, and you want to just go ahead and just do everything on this iPad, and you want to replace your whole entire workflow for this type of iPad, well then, you may want to go for an iPad Pro, at least the M1 model for the 11-inch model. That may be a better way for you, but in my opinion, the performance, app opening speeds, playing heavy intensive games, different things like that, you are really going to be getting the same type of experience across the board. There's not really going to be an iPad that, feels or performs extremely way better than the other one, but I will tell you, the M1 iPad Pro has a lot more flexibility there. If you want to go ahead and get the highest end model, well, you have that opportunity. If you want to get the lowest end model of the iPad Pro, well, you have that ability too. There's really only one model of the iPad Air when it comes down to the performance, so that's a big thing to keep in mind as well. So personally, I don't think there's that big of a difference in terms of performance, but if you want the option of just getting everything you want on an iPad, well, probably the M1 iPad Pro is probably the one for you there. So that kind of covers it up. Probably everything I wanted to hit on. And to be completely honest, I think getting an M1 iPad Pro is a really good option. I don't think it's a waste of money. I think, if you want to spend the extra money, you are getting a better device overall. You're getting that 120 Hz ProMotion display. You're getting that better display at the end of the day, which is amazing. You're getting Face ID technology. You're getting a way better camera setup. You're getting, if you want to spend more money, more options on the RAM, which is really cool. But I think the iPad Air is a really good iPad as well. And these two devices are way more similar than not. I mean, performance-wise, they're kind of about the same. Build quality-wise, they're kind of about the same. Camera quality-wise, they're kind of about the same. So you're getting almost an M1 iPad Pro. So it's like almost an M1 iPad Pro. So if you don't need everything from an M1 iPad, well then you can get everything from that iPad Air 5 and pretty much move on with your life. So I think ultimately, if I had to choose one of these, and if they were both free, I would pick up the most expensive one. I could buy the 12.9-inch M1 iPad Pro, but realistically speaking, I would be totally fine with an M1 iPad Air 5. But if you have an extra couple $100s to spend, I think the M1 iPad Pro is definitely justified in my opinion. So that kind of covers it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.